Hello guys, this is day 2 of modernism. So where this is going to go, I'm going to hopefully get you into the main door of T.S. Eliot's work, The Love Song of Prufrock. This poem is the modernist poem. It's the poem that got a lot of notice. It started up a lot of careers, and it made T.S. Eliot a very important person in culture and in the English writing. What I've done, I'm going to set the timer for 20 minutes so that I don't exceed the 20-minute mark. T.S. Eliot's Prufrock, it's a long poem. It's complex. It's like listening to a symphony. So if you've had a musical background, you may see the analogy I'm making here. It's very, I think I've used the word dense already. It's very dense. But once you see the pattern, once you see his method, and once you see his intentions, it all falls into place. Okay, so just keep in mind, reading it cold, let's use that expression. If you just read it cold, you'd be totally lost and you're going, what the hell is Smith doing? Okay, so just sit back, relax for a bit, and I'm going to set the timer now for the 20-minute mark. So once that goes off, breaking it into 20 increments, I think, should make it safe and sane and easy for you to digest, let's say. Okay, now what I want to start off with here, last time I showed you this chart. Okay, so T.S. Eliot is all about the early stages of modernism, okay, which means he's all in the first-hand column. This is from the 1900s to 1960, roughly. Okay? So, where it says what the artist's intentions are, that very first one about defying expectation, that is his main goal. He's going to say one thing and tweak it. He's not going to do the exact opposite, but he's going to show you a flip side of the equation, let's say. So you got to be prepared for the unexpected. So at this stage of modernism, what's being affected is more a shifting in morality and intention. The presentation of the poem will, for the most part, still adhere to traditional concepts. Okay, so when we had the office hours today, Olin raised the question about when you look at modernist poetry at this stage, are you looking at the style and the syntax? For the most part, that isn't going to be affected. It's still going to sound like a poem. It looks like a poem. The radical nature of modernism doesn't really show up until after the 1960s, up here under postmodernism. Okay? So what I want you to be aware of, the important thing, modernism is all about defying the status quo. You want to shock the public. Sometimes it's a gentle shock, sometimes it's an outright charge, but what it comes down to, the public should not expect to understand the work immediately. The public should sit back, relax for a few seconds, and think about what they've just read. Okay? Okay, so that's the chart. Let me get rid of the chart here. I did want to show you a really short poem. It's in the Modernism tab. It's by Ezra Pound. Now, Ezra Pound is probably what one could call the father of modernism. He's the one who got the ball rolling. So he encouraged T.S. Eliot's work. He encouraged T.S. Eliot to keep writing and introduced Eliot to all these other important people. And then it ends up Eliot became the poster boy for modernism. Okay, but Pound is the one, Ezra Pound is the one who started up the movement, really. And I'm picking one of his shorter works. It's very short. The title is almost longer than the poem itself. So the full title is In a Station of the Metro. So when you say metro, that means a train station. Okay. Presumably he's either in London or he's in Paris. But I believe it's Chicago, they call it the metro. No, they call it the L. It's St. Louis who calls their line the metro. So at any rate, this is really short. It's only 2 lines. The apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough. Okay, so that's it. So all he's getting at, and keeping it simple and short, you are given a first-hand impression of the poet's immediate reaction of being in a crowd of people at a train station. And he's shifting from the people to nature. In this case, it's a rather positive sounding poem. It's optimistic. This was written before World War I. Where this is a little radical is because it's so short. He's mimicking the haiku and the tanka, those Japanese poem verses, which are very short. And if you've read anything of Zen, Z-E-N, Zen poetry, it's very confusing. It's intended to make you think and sit back and reflect and meditate. You're not supposed to just read this, digest it. You got to meditate on it to see where it affects you, how it emotionally has you approach the culture. Okay, so that's a really short version. He has written a lot longer pieces. I just wanted to show you something short and quick. But the public, when they would have seen this, would have said, what's happening? This is too short. It's only 2 lines. What's he talking about? It's just a crowd. Then we're talking about petals. Okay. He wanted that shock reaction for a few. And it's also based on what's called imagist. The word image, imagist. They were concentrating mainly just on images, not necessarily on plot. Okay. So they just wanted to present a scene, and you think about it. Okay. So that's a modernist take. Pound. Okay, now if you follow the calendar of events that I have out here, you'll notice I do have a section here that says William Shakespeare's Hamlet. I'm going to table that for a while. I do feel it's important that you address this, and I do have under here where it says demo overview, a very quick 5-second explanation of what happens in the play. I do want to cover that because the information here does affect, in a sense, the information that you'll see in Prufrock. So, I'm doing this 2-step forward, 1-step back concept. Okay, so today I just want to concentrate on modernism. The second or third day I cover modernism, I will bring up Hamlet. Okay, so just be prepared. Okay, so I'm going to show you the poem itself. This is the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. And like I said, it's long. Notice how long it is. So this is the complete poem. Again, we're breaking it up in segments, so don't worry. If you want to, you can go out here to this link and read the whole thing. Okay? But I am going to be breaking that down for you slowly. Every time you look at the poem, there's more than one version out there, is what I'm getting at. There's more than one version out there. So I've picked one version that I prefer over the others. What happens, the language doesn't change, the images don't change, the meaning doesn't change, it's just the slight difference in presentation. Okay? So on a office hour visit, if you want me to talk more about that, I can. But I've picked the version I want to use. Okay, so notice this is called T.S. Eliot. I'm going to start with the poet himself. Okay, so his version of modernism, remember, he's taking Pound's ideas and changing them slightly. So Eliot is saying the poet, the personality of the poet, is not a factor in the created process. So if you think back to what Pound did with that in the station of the Metro, you got a strong sense of the persona and the poet being the same person. Eliot is saying, however, on the other hand, the poet is the creator, the poem is influenced by the poet, but the poem should not be reflecting the poet's views. The poem should be creating a new figure. So if you remember what I said about modernism wanting to create a new experience, Eliot wants to create a whole new person for you to experience. What it's like to be, in this case, J. Alfred Prufrock, the title name. So this is not Eliot's personality, this is J. Alfred Prufrock's personality. Okay. So in that manner, the reason Eliot really prefers this, you as a reader will concentrate on the poem, not on the life of the poet. He wants you to view the structure and the artwork first, and then you look at the poet, if you're curious. Okay? So when you do any analytical studies, according to Eliot, you only look at the poem. And this was a major way of doing critical papers. Okay? In fact, it's the way I was taught. It's called New Criticism. I'm going to skip this section here. So when we go through the poem, okay, the whole poem is a psychological portrayal of a character. The character is talking to you. It is a monologue. So if you remember your Shakespearean studies, an interior monologue, when you have it performed on stage, it's called a soliloquy. Hamlet has 3, I believe, of major important soliloquies where he's the only character on the stage. He's talking to himself, but the audience hears him, and therefore the audience knows what he's thinking. The love song of J. Alfred Prufrock is a poem as if you have a character on stage just talking to himself, thinking to himself. You hear his thoughts. He doesn't know you exist. You know he exists. And that's a very strong point. I'll be coming back to that later. He does not know you exist. So in the end, what happens, you learn what it's like to be J. Alfred Prufrock. Another way of putting it, this is an example of stream of consciousness. This is a major wonderful, perfect example of stream of consciousness in verse. Okay. So some of this information on this page is going to repeat what I've just said. You're falling into the head of the protagonist, Prufrock. These thoughts that you're reading will seem random. They connect through analysis, but through just reading them, you won't make the immediate association. You got to sit back and study the poem in order to understand the connections that are there. Okay? So just as a reader, not as a critic, but as a reader, you immediately won't see these connections. I'll explain how the connections are there and what's the pattern. The other thing of major importance, the time involved here is undetermined. It's not specified. So in other words, when you read the poem, it could be just a few seconds out of Prufrock's life, or it could be an hour out of his life, or it could be his entire life. Okay? There is no definable timeline. All you know is this is what makes up Prufrock, and this is why he is the way he acts. Okay? Time in this poem is important. Just like time is important to classical music and music in general, time is important to Prufrock. So, while we're going through this, the thing to keep in mind, because it's psychological, it will not be logical. So again, going back to this word random, that when you are at home, just sitting in a chair, watching TV, talking on the phone, at random, you get thoughts in your head. Okay? That's what makes us human. That's how we think. We could be reading a text in front of ourselves and suddenly have a flashback to first grade. Or a flashback to a conversation you had with your mother earlier in the morning. Our brain is complex, and we are multitasking all the time in the head. Okay? That's why they say when you're reading, be comfortable enough that you can concentrate on the words, but don't be over comfortable, because otherwise your brain will start dreaming and daydreaming and you'll fall asleep. Okay? So again, the brain doesn't operate very logically. It operates psychologically. Our emotions are controlling our thoughts. Our subconscious is controlling our thoughts. So this poem is an excellent example of Freudian concepts. This was written right after, a few years after Freud came out with his publications. So my main point here, the takeaway from that one line, if you read something and you're going, what the F? What is this? Just remember, you might not be intended to understand it. Eliot is not playing tricks. Eliot is just showing you the thought process of a person, of an individual. Furthermore, it'll be in a private voice. It's a private conversation. Again, he does not know you exist. So he can say whatever he wants to because he's only talking to himself. Okay? That's the important thing. When you are thinking to yourself, you don't censor yourself. Okay? Just remember that. This is a private voice, Freudian-based, psychological. Case in point, I mean, to be honest here, T.S. Eliot's poem is fantastic. It's what, when I went over this in class in 11th grade, yeah, in 11th grade, it opened up poetry to me in a whole new way. I adore T.S. Eliot's work. That's the reason I write poetry, is because of this poem. I liked it before, don't get me wrong, but when I read T.S. Eliot's work, I took a whole new shift in thought. Okay. So the important thing, as a reader, you learn Prufrock's personality, you learn his weaknesses, you learn his makeup. You see things about Prufrock that Prufrock cannot see himself. And that's another major part of the poem. You understand Prufrock better than he understands himself. I'm getting near the 20-minute mark, and I'm almost finished. So I'm going to talk over the 20-minute mark. I'm going to turn off the timer and wrap up here. So we got probably less than 5 minutes, I'll be finished. The full poem, Eliot is using what's called intertextuality. Please remember that word for the rest of your life. Intertextuality. That's when you make allusions to other artists. You make allusions to other historical events. You make allusions to people from your personal life or from your contemporary life. You're making allusions, and you're taking all this work and braiding it together. Sometimes it can be confusing. That's the beauty of intertextuality. That is the result of intertextuality. You're not supposed to understand something 100% perfectly the first time you go through it. Okay? So some of the artwork that is influencing Prufrock, which is influencing Eliot, okay? We're going to talk about Dante's Inferno. That's going to be a long conversation. That's going to be video 2. Or 3 in this case. Video 3 is all about Dante's Inferno. We're going to talk about Michelangelo. We're going to talk about biblical allusions that Eliot inserts into the poem. I will briefly discuss Shakespeare in this case. But you notice Hamlet is a major influence on the poem. Okay? So keep that in mind. I won't bring up Andrew Marvell. He's an important poet. He is important to the decade after the English Renaissance, but it won't impact your studies for today, for this course. Likewise, this Greek poet, I may mention it if I remember to, but the last 2 references, I just want you to be aware they exist. He's using them. He's making their words and their plots and their imagery, and he's tying it in, mixing it in with his words, his imagery. And he's having them come out meaning something different. And that's the main takeaway about intertextuality. When you use this, you're taking somebody's words, putting them into your words, and it's affecting the themes and the motifs and the patterns in your work. And you're taking again, this is from modernism, you take from the old and make it new. You're referencing from an old poet, putting it in your work, and making it mean something totally different. Something important for the contemporary world. So really, by breaking up this poem into parts, chunks of information, like I said, 20-minute chunks at a time, you'll be able to see these connections. If at any point you get lost with what I'm saying, or if I'm not over-explaining enough, Randall mentioned this in our office hours, if I don't explain something enough, tell me, ask me questions. That's what email is for if you don't want everyone else in the class to know you have a question. Okay? Yeah, I'll stop here for this much. So we have an overview of Eliot's concepts of modernism. Okay? So now we're going to narrow the focus in the next video and take this baby steps at a time. So again, any questions that pop up, just send me an email, drop me a line, however you want to get in contact with me, I'll be here. You guys stay safe, as I've been saying. Take it easy, and I'll see you next time.